In the small, quiet village of Temba, surrounded by dusty roads and whispering trees, lived a young couple, Kanya and Jabo. They had once been deeply in love, holding hands under the stars and dreaming of a better tomorrow. But now, those dreams were buried under the weight of poverty. Their home was nothing more than a tiny mud house with a leaking roof and cracked walls. Every morning, Jabo would wake up before sunrise, wipe the sweat from his brow, and head to the fields to work as a farm laborer. He earned just enough to buy a little food and maybe one bar of soap at the end of the week, but he never complained. He believed that love and patience would see them through. Kanya, on the other hand, was not at peace. Her heart was full of anger, her eyes always searching for something more, something better. She had grown tired of patching her torn wrapper, tired of cooking with an empty pot, and tired of living a life that felt like a punishment. She had imagined a life of silk dresses, beautiful jewelry, and a home filled with laughter and luxury. But instead, she was stuck in a life where hunger knocked on their door more often than happiness. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across their little hut, Kanya exploded in frustration. She looked around their home, her eyes burning with anger. "Look at this house," she snapped, throwing her wrapper to the ground. "Look at this torn wrapper, this empty pot. Is this what you call life? You said things would get better. When, Jabo? When?" Jabo stood silently, his heart heavy, his hands still dirty from the day's work. He looked at his wife, wishing he could give her the world. But all he had were calloused hands and broken dreams. He tried to comfort her, telling her that things would change, that he was working hard, and that their day would come. But his words fell on deaf ears. Kanya didn't want promises anymore. She wanted results. And slowly, her love began to turn into resentment. The more Jabo tried to make her smile, the more distant she became. She would sit outside their home for hours, watching the other villagers, especially the ones with money, and silently compare their lives to hers. Every gold earring she saw on another woman's ear felt like a stab to her chest. Every man riding a bicycle or cart made her resent her husband more. She didn't see Jabo's kindness anymore. She didn't see his sacrifices. All she saw was his failure to give her the life she believed she deserved. Their once warm home had turned cold. Even though they lived under the same roof, Kanya and Jabo were now two strangers sharing silence, not dreams. And deep within Kanya's heart, a dangerous thought began to grow. A thought so dark, so unthinkable, that even she couldn't fully understand it yet. But one thing was certain: she was no longer willing to suffer in silence. And soon, the choices she would make would not only change her life forever, but shake the entire village of Temba to its core. One morning, the peaceful village of Temba was filled with whispers and excitement. Something unusual had happened, something that quickly became the talk of every corner. A wealthy woman named Zelina had returned from the big city. People said she was the daughter of a powerful merchant, a woman who had seen the world and tasted riches. She came with shining jewelry, elegant clothes, and a convoy of carts carrying luxurious goods. Her arrival turned heads, and her beauty made hearts stop. But it wasn't just her beauty, it was her power, her confidence, her presence. She walked like a queen, and people bowed without even realizing it. Zelina didn't come just to visit. She had plans, big ones. She wanted to open a cocoa business right there in the village. She bought land, hired workers, and began building her empire. The villagers were amazed. For many, it was an opportunity to earn, but for others, it was a chance to witness wealth they had only dreamed of. Jabo, like many other villagers, heard about the job openings on Zelina's farm. He applied without expecting much. But something surprising happened. He was selected. He didn't know that his humble nature and hard-working spirit had caught Zelina's attention right from the start. She saw something in him that others missed. There was something about his quiet strength, the way he spoke with respect, the way he carried himself with dignity, even in his old clothes. As days passed, Zelina began to notice Jabo more closely. She observed how he worked harder than the others, how he never complained, how he treated everyone kindly, even when tired or hungry. He didn't chase after her like the other men. He didn't try to impress her with flattery. He was just himself, and that difference pulled her attention like a magnet. One afternoon, as Zelina watched Jabo carrying cocoa sacks under the hot sun, she whispered to herself, "He may be poor, but he is different. There's something rare in him." That small thought didn't fade. It grew. Slowly, curiosity turned into interest. Zelina began speaking to Jabo more often, offering him cool water after work, asking about his life. And although Jabo remained respectful and distant, her gaze lingered a little longer each time. Meanwhile, back at home, Kanya noticed everything. She saw how Zelina's eyes followed her husband. She saw how Zelina smiled at him, how she asked for him more than the others. At first, it made her uneasy, but not for the reasons most would think. She didn't feel jealous. No, what she felt was opportunity. A dangerous thought crept into her mind, a thought that made her heart beat faster. What if this rich woman wanted Jabo not just as a worker, but as something more? What if Zelina's interest could be turned into profit? Kanya didn't see love or loyalty anymore. She saw gold. She saw a chance to turn her misery into money. And in that moment, a dark plan began to form in her heart. A plan so bold, so shocking, that it would shake the foundation of their marriage, and eventually the entire village. Slowly, Kanya's heart turned colder, her mind sharper with greed. Day by day, she began to manipulate Jabo without him even realizing it. She started suggesting little changes, urging him to dress better, to wear the shirt that made his shoulders look broader, to comb his hair neatly before going to work. She even used the small coins Jabo brought home to secretly buy soap and oil so he would smell good when he stood near Zelina. Every compliment she gave him now had a hidden purpose. "You should walk with more confidence," she'd say, pretending to encourage him. Strong men get noticed more. Jabo, innocent and loyal, thought his wife was just being supportive. He smiled at her efforts, grateful that she was finally showing interest in his work again. He didn't know that behind her sweet words, there was a dangerous motive. At night, Kanya would sit silently, staring at the moon, imagining the life she could have with Zelina's money. She dreamed of golden necklaces, fine clothes, a house with glass windows, and servants at her feet. And all of it, she believed, was within reach, if only Zelina truly wanted Jabo. But in her mind, she wasn't afraid to give him away. To her, he had become a means to an end. One afternoon, Kanya visited her friend Luma and whispered her thoughts with a wicked grin. "If Zelina wants him, she can have him, but not for free. I want her money, and she can take my husband." Luma gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "Kanya, you would sell your own husband?" Kanya didn't flinch. Her voice was cold, her eyes sharp. "Yes, for the right price." Luma shook her head, horrified. "But he loves you. He trusts you. How can you even think like this?" But Kanya was already lost in her dream. Her mind was full of silver coins, silk gowns, and the sound of doors opening into mansions. She didn't see Jabo's love anymore. She only saw the weight of poverty he represented. She believed this was her only chance to escape suffering, to finally rise above the mud that had trapped her for years. And so, she continued her plan, carefully pushing Jabo into Zelina's view like a puppet. She made him believe it was all his hard work that was being noticed, while in truth, she was the one moving all the strings behind him. Her heart no longer beat for love, it beat for greed. But what Kanya didn't know was that when you feed greed, it grows like poison. It never stops. And soon, it begins to consume everything, even the little happiness that once lived in a poor man's hut. One quiet evening, when the sky turned a deep shade of orange and the village had begun to settle, Kanya made her boldest move yet. She wrapped a scarf around her head, glanced around to make sure no one saw her, and walked silently towards Zelina's grand house. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was firm. She was about to change her life forever, no matter the cost. Zelina was surprised to see Kanya standing at her gate. She welcomed her in with curiosity, not knowing what this unexpected visit could mean. The two women sat down, one glowing with wealth and pride, the other burning with greed and ambition. Kanya didn't waste time with polite greetings. Her eyes were sharp, her voice steady. "You want my husband, don't you?" Kanya said boldly, staring straight into Zelina's eyes. "You've been watching him, admiring him. Well, I'll give him to you, but I want 300 gold coins. No less." Zelina's eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment she thought she had heard wrong. Was this woman really offering her own husband for money? But the more she looked at Kanya's serious face, the more she realized this was no joke. Kanya was dead serious. At first, Zelina hesitated. The idea was shocking, even for someone as powerful as her. But deep inside, a part of her was flattered that someone would give up a man just to gain wealth, just for her. And the thought of having Jabo completely, without guilt, without secrecy, made the offer tempting. Days passed. Zelina thought about it, argued with herself, and finally, greed won in her heart too. She sent for Kanya and accepted the deal. The 300 gold coins were brought in a leather pouch, heavy and shining, more money than Kanya had ever seen in her life. Her hands trembled as she held it, not out of guilt, but excitement. The deal was done. The betrayal was sealed. The next day, Jabo returned home from work tired, expecting a warm meal and his wife's smile. But what he found froze him to the bone. The door was wide open, and inside, Kanya was folding his clothes into a sack. Confused, he stepped in, his voice full of concern. "Kanya, what are you doing? Are we moving somewhere?" But Kanya didn't even look at him. She kept folding. Her voice was cold, like ice. "You're not staying here anymore," she said. "You belong to Zelina now. She bought you. Take your loyalty where it will finally pay off." Jabo stood frozen. The words didn't make sense. His heart raced as he tried to understand what she meant. But when Kanya opened the pouch and poured the glittering gold coins onto the floor, it hit him like thunder. The woman he loved had sold him like a goat in the market. His heart shattered in silence. He looked at her, hoping, begging for a sign that it was just a cruel joke. But there was nothing in her eyes except greed. No love, no regret. The house felt colder than ever. The walls that once held their laughter now echoed with betrayal. And as Jabo stepped outside, with nothing but a sack and a broken soul, he knew something precious had died that day. Not just love, but trust. Forever. Zelina, true to her promise, welcomed Jabo into a life he had never imagined. She built him a beautiful house with polished wooden floors and shining glass windows. She dressed him in silk garments, fed him delicious meals, and introduced him as her partner in business and life. To the world, Jabo had now risen from a poor farm worker to the companion of the wealthiest woman in Temba. But deep inside, Jabo felt nothing but emptiness. Every smile he forced in public was a mask. Every luxury he touched felt cold. At night, he stared at the ceiling, remembering the tiny mud house where he once believed love lived. He thought of the laughter he once shared with Kanya, the dreams they once whispered in the dark, even if it was with empty stomachs. He couldn't understand how something so sacred could be sold like a bag of grain. And even though Zelina was kind, her affection felt heavy, almost like a chain he could never remove. Back in the village, Kanya's life had changed overnight. With gold in her hands, she became a different woman. She walked through the market wearing expensive wrappers and loud jewelry. She threw coins at children and laughed loudly at every corner. She strutted with pride, no longer the woman who once wept over empty pots. Instead, she was now the one people looked at with envy. Kanya's voice echoed in every gathering. "I sold poverty and bought gold," she would boast with a smirk. "Who says money can't buy peace?" People listened, some with admiration, others with silent disgust. But Kanya didn't care. She believed she had beaten life at its own game. She had traded a poor man for wealth, and in her mind, that made her clever, powerful. But peace did not come. At night, her golden bracelets didn't comfort her. Her bed, though soft and grand, felt cold. Her laughter during the day turned into strange silence when the lanterns were off. Slowly, a shadow began to grow inside her, a feeling she couldn't name, something uncomfortable, something missing. She would walk past her old house and pause, pretending not to care. But a part of her heart would ache when she saw it empty, when she remembered the gentle way Jabo once held her hand, how he used to wipe her tears with his rough, hard-working fingers. A love that once held value, now lost, all for coins that could never whisper comfort. And while people clapped for her riches, no one clapped for her happiness, because deep down, everyone could see it. Kanya had won gold, but lost something far more precious: love, trust, and peace of mind. And no matter how many bangles she wore, her heart grew heavier with each passing day. The life of regret had only just begun. Zelina at first tried everything to make Jabo happy. She thought that by giving him a better life, comfort, luxury, and status, his heart would eventually warm to her. But days turned into weeks, and Jabo remained cold. He barely spoke unless necessary, avoided her gaze, and never smiled from the heart. He would sit silently by the window, looking far into the distance, lost in thoughts that didn't belong to this new world. Zelina tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that love would grow with time, but it didn't. One day, she softly reached out to hold his hand, but he quietly pulled it away. That small rejection felt louder than any words. The truth was clear. Jabo's heart still lived in a small mud house, next to a woman who no longer wanted him. Slowly, Zelina's affection turned to frustration. She started spending less time at home, avoiding the awkward silence that filled every room. Her excitement for him faded, and the distance between them grew like a silent wall. At the same time, in the village, Kanya's golden days began to lose their shine. A smooth-talking man from the city came promising a quick investment scheme that would triple her money. Blinded by greed and pride, Kanya poured nearly half her gold into the scheme without thinking twice. Within weeks, the man vanished, and so did her money. Panic hit her like a storm. For the first time, she felt fear creeping into her lavish life. Before she could recover from that shock, tragedy struck again. One night, while Kanya was asleep, a strange smell filled her grand house. Smoke rose, and soon flames consumed everything. Her expensive clothes, jewelry, furniture, and all that she had bought with Jabo's price. The fire spread so quickly that by the time neighbors arrived, it was too late. The house collapsed in ashes. Kanya stood outside barefoot, watching her dream turn into smoke and dust. Rumors began to fly across the village. People whispered in corners, shook their heads, and looked at her with pity. Maybe the gods are angry, some said. You don't trade love for gold without paying a price. Others whispered stories of curses and karma, how blessings gained through betrayal never last. Kanya, once proud and boastful, now sat on the ground with nothing but her burnt wrappers and empty hands. The same villagers who once admired her riches now passed by without greeting. Children who used to chase her for coins now stared at her with wide, confused eyes. And while Jabo still lived in comfort, his soul remained wounded. Zelina, now distant and tired, began to treat him more like a stranger than a partner. Her love, once warm, had grown cold under the weight of his silence. And Kanya, sitting in the ruins of her former glory, realized something far too late. Karma doesn't scream when it arrives. It walks in quietly, taking back everything that was never meant to be yours. And so, the punishment began, not with swords or thunder, but with quiet loss, broken hearts, and burning regrets. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, Jabo packed a small bag and quietly walked out of Zelina's mansion without saying a word. He didn't leave a note. He didn't look back. His footsteps were calm, steady, and sure. He was done living a life that never belonged to him. He walked through the fields, past the tall cocoa trees, and followed the dusty road that led back to the village where everything had begun. When he reached his old home, all that remained was a charred ruin, blackened walls, and ash. The same home where he once believed love could grow, where he dreamed of a simple life with Kanya. But he hadn't returned for her, not for apologies, not for revenge. He came only to say goodbye to the past, to the love that had been sold, to the pain he had carried silently. After standing there for a while in silence, he turned away and walked on, leaving behind the broken pieces of his old life. He traveled to a far-off village where no one knew his name. There, he started working again, this time in a small workshop that made clay pots and baskets. The work was hard, the pay small, but his heart finally felt at peace. Each coin he earned came with pride. Each meal he ate came with dignity. In that same village, he met a woman named Amazi. She was a widow, gentle and soft-spoken, with 2 small children who always clung to her side. Life had been unkind to her too, but she carried her pain with quiet strength. She would often greet Jabo with a warm smile when he passed by the market. Slowly, without forcing it, a bond began to form. Jabo would help her carry firewood, and she would send warm meals to his door. The children grew fond of him, and he found himself laughing again. Real laughter, not the empty smiles he had worn in Zelina's house. Amazi never asked about his past, and Jabo never spoke of it. But in their silence, they understood each other's wounds. There was no gold between them, no fancy gifts, no loud promises, just respect, kindness, and quiet care. Jabo finally found what he had always searched for, not riches, not status, but peace of heart. In a place far from betrayal and greed, he was learning to love again, not through words, but through small acts of goodness every day. And with Amazi and her children, he began to build a new life, not grand, but honest. A life that no one could ever buy or sell. And as he looked around at the simple joys, fresh water, laughter of children, a kind woman beside him, Jabo finally felt whole again. Kanya's life had turned into a cruel joke, one she could no longer laugh at. Her once proud steps were now slow and shaky, her elegant clothes replaced with rags. The woman who once walked through the village with gold earrings and loud boasts was now seen sitting by the roadside, barefoot, her hands stretched out for scraps. Her eyes were hollow, her face tired and sunburnt. Everything she had once sold her soul for was gone, burnt, stolen, wasted. Desperate and ashamed, she tried to find Zelina. She thought maybe the rich woman would show pity, maybe she would offer a helping hand, just one more chance. But Zelina had vanished from Temba, moved to another town to expand her business, and escape the memory of the man who never loved her back. There was no address left, no one to plead with. Kanya was alone. Her desperation grew deeper. With trembling hands, she asked people in the village if they knew where Jabo had gone. She thought maybe, just maybe, he could forgive her. Maybe he would take her back. But word soon reached her that Jabo had started a new life in another village, and he had no intention of ever seeing her again. She went to the market where he once used to work, standing near the same stall where they used to share meals and dreams. Now she begged the vendors for leftover food. Some looked at her with pity, others with scorn. The same villagers, who once envied her for her sudden wealth, now gossiped behind her back. They murmured she sold her own husband for coins. They murmured, "Now look, those coins turned to dust." She traded love for gold and ended with nothing. She thought she was clever, but she sold her happiness. Children would sometimes point at her and whisper, "That's the woman who sold her husband like a goat." Kanya could hear the whispers, feel the shame crawl over her skin like thorns. She had wanted a better life, but the path she chose led only to humiliation and hunger. The gold that once sparkled in her hands had cursed her instead. Her dreams of riches had become a nightmare of loneliness. No one offered her friendship anymore. No one respected her. Even the friends who once cheered her wealth now avoided her shadow. Karma had come silently, but it had come powerfully. And it didn't take revenge with swords. It took everything she once valued and left her with only regret. As she sat by the dusty roadside with her face in her hands, Kanya realized the weight of her actions. She had lost the only man who ever truly loved her. She had chased glitter, and it vanished like smoke. Her heart, once full of desire, was now heavy with guilt. In that silence, she finally understood. Some things in life are worth more than gold, but by the time she realized it, it was already too late. One quiet evening, as the orange sun dipped behind the hills of Temba, the villagers gathered around the central fire for their usual evening stories. Children sat cross-legged on the ground, their eyes wide with curiosity. The elders sat on wooden stools, their wrinkled faces calm with wisdom. Among them was Elder Bako, known across villages for his powerful words and life lessons. On this particular evening, his voice carried something different, something heavy with meaning. He stood slowly, leaning on his staff, and began to speak in a calm, steady tone. "Let me tell you a story," he said, "of a woman who traded her heart for coins, and a man who carried pain in silence." The crowd grew quiet. Even the winds seemed to pause. Elder Bako told the story of Kanya and Jabo, from their days of struggle in a poor mud house, to the arrival of the wealthy Zelina, to the day Kanya made a deal that shook the village's spirit. He told how Jabo's loyalty was sold like a bag of yam, how Kanya's hunger for wealth blinded her to the love she had, and how in the end, she was left with nothing but shame and dust. "A woman," Elder Bako continued, his voice echoing into the night, "who sold love for gold, found herself sold to sorrow, and the man she discarded rose again, not with riches, but with dignity." The villagers listened, some nodding in agreement, others wiping silent tears. Even the children sat in stunned silence, sensing the weight of the story. Elder Bako lifted his eyes to the crowd and spoke louder. "Greed builds no home. Betrayal feeds no soul. What we value today can become our curse tomorrow. But loyalty is wealth that no coin can match." Murmurs ran through the crowd. The story didn't just stay within the borders of Temba. The next day, farmers spoke of it in the fields. Women repeated it at the riverbanks while washing clothes. Traders passed it from stall to stall, and soon it reached neighboring villages. People began using Kanya's name not with respect, but as a warning. "Don't be like Kanya," they'd say. "Don't trade real love for glitter that fades." In gatherings, her tale became a moral lesson, taught to the young, repeated by the old. It reminded everyone that shortcuts to success often lead to regret, and that the hands that push love away may end up begging for comfort one day. Jabo's name, on the other hand, was spoken with quiet admiration. A man who was sold like property, yet chose to rebuild himself with honor instead of revenge. He had become a symbol of resilience, a man who didn't let betrayal define him. That evening at the village fire had changed something, not just in how people saw Kanya and Jabo, but in how they saw themselves, in their marriages, their dreams, and their values. The story had sunk deep into their hearts, because sometimes one person's fall becomes everyone's lesson. Years passed, and Jabo's life took a new shape, one not built on riches, but on peace, respect, and quiet dignity. In his new village, people began to admire him for his wisdom, hard work, and humility. He became a voice that people listened to during community meetings, a guide for the young men who sought direction, and a helping hand for the needy. Though he never remarried officially, he lived peacefully with Amazi, the gentle widow who had welcomed him with kindness. Together, they raised her 2 children like a real family. The children loved Jabo as their own father, and he taught them values he had learned the hard way: honor, love, and loyalty. Life was simple, but beautiful. There were no gold coins or fancy clothes, but there was laughter in the home, warmth in the evenings, and respect in every corner of the village. Jabo had found something that all the riches of the world could never buy: peace of heart. Far away, in the village of Temba, the name Kanya was no longer spoken with respect. Her wealth had disappeared faster than it came. No one remembered the coins she once boasted about. She had no friends left, no home to return to, no family to comfort her. Her arrogance had pushed everyone away. The villagers no longer whispered her story with envy. They now spoke of her with pity. Kanya spent her last days on a lonely street corner, her once proud eyes now hollow, her hands stretched out for a piece of bread. Passers-by hardly recognized the woman who once flaunted her wealth and laughed at the poor. She died one cold night, quietly, unnoticed. No one mourned her, no one lit a candle in her memory, and no one spoke her name at the village fire. And so, her story ended, not with applause, not with comfort, but with silence. The narrator's voice returned softly, carrying the final words like a whisper into the heart of the audience. She thought wealth would make her rich, but in chasing gold, she lost the diamond she already had. And that diamond was Jabo, the man who loved her when they had nothing, the man who stood by her through hardship, and the man she sold for coins. The tale leaves a heavy silence behind, a lesson written not in ink, but in pain and regret. Never sell loyalty for luxury. Never trade love for greed, because the cost is heavier than gold, and the regret lasts longer than a lifetime. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. How many times do we chase glitter, forgetting the true gold we already have? Jabo's loyalty was priceless, but Kanya realized it too late. Don't let greed blind you to the love that stands by you in your hardest times. Life isn't about gold coins or big houses. It's about people who hold your hand when the world turns its back. If you felt the pain, the lesson, and the truth in this story, please don't keep it to yourself. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it, someone who may be walking the same road of regret without knowing it. Like this video if it made you feel something deep. Share it with your friends and loved ones so that they too may learn the power of love over greed. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful life stories that touch the soul and awaken the heart. Thank you for watching. Your support means everything. Stay kind, stay humble, and always choose love over gold.